Welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Our theme for 2026 continues. The future of work, meaning is the new money. Because meaning is simply the greatest motivational force on earth. But 68% of the global workforce is disengaged, leaving $9.6 trillion in productivity on the table every year. Gen Z, the canary in the coal mine, is exposing structural failures everyone else learned to ignore, rationalize, or endure. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host, bringing over 30 years of experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and designing solutions that solve real problems. This podcast delivers boots-on-the-ground intelligence, real conversations with CEOs, fractional executives, coaches, and small and medium-sized business leaders navigating the same crisis, mitigating the talent hemorrhage before competitive viability disappears. We go beyond symptoms like engagement scores and wellness programs to focus on the structural failures beneath them. Frontline intelligence, actionable frameworks, hard truths. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now let's throttle up and dive into today's episode. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. This is your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me this morning is Zoe Arden, who has spent 20 years proving that storytelling isn't soft skills, it's strategic infrastructure for modern leadership. Zoe is a fellow at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership and author of Story-Centered Leadership, Crafting Cultures of Change, published by Routledge. With 13 years in managing director and director roles at organizations like British Telecommunications, BT, Weber Shandwick, and Sustainability, Zoe has operated in the complexity of global business while conducting leadership research at Cambridge. Her work is grounded in substance. She delivered storytelling and leadership workshops to over 30,000 leaders worldwide and interviewed more than 100 people to develop her 5-stage story-centered leadership model: story listening, building, shaping, sharing, and living. This isn't about crafting better presentations. It's about narrative to bridge divides, catalyze action, and build cultures where change actually happens. Zoe's core belief connects directly to our 2026 theme. At the time of polarization and fragmentation, stories have the power to help us imagine and build healthy, productive workplaces grounded in purpose and agency. And I'm truly pleased and delighted to have Zoe here with me this morning. Good morning, Zoe. How are you?
I'm great, John. It's actually Zoe.
Zoe, I apologize.
Yeah. No problem. The only person that calls me Zoe is my husband, and I don't think we know each other that well yet.
No, I don't think so, but that's okay. I appreciate it, Zoe, and we will make that correction as we go.
Super.
So, Zoe, let me ask you this question, and I'll start off with my traditional beginning question. It is, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what were some of the influences in your early life?
Yeah. That's a profound question to start with. So I am a Londoner, so I'm based in the UK. Came from several generations of Londoners, actually. I was very disappointed when I did my DNA and found there was nothing exotic in it whatsoever. And I really developed a passion at university for sort of theatre. I was doing a politics degree and I was writing for the student newspaper. So that really sort of set me on a path to where I am now. And as you alluded to, I've written this book called Story-Centered Leadership. One of the things I say early on is, my growing up story wasn't actually a pretty story. And it's interesting. We love happily ever after stories. And one of the things I talk about actually is how we can create our own story for ourselves. We don't have to be shackled to those old stories.
Yeah. I wish many people understood that. I think too often they live in the shadows of what came before.
Yeah.
And live in the past. And that's sad. It's hard sometimes to break free and to welcome, I always say there's two ways you could look at it. It's running away from something or running towards something. And I think people have to do more running towards than running away. But anyway, let me any reflection on that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I talk about in story-centered leadership is the self-limiting stories that we have that can box us in, whether that's I'm not very good at leading teams, I'm better on my own, this culture is broken, whatever it might be. We often get stuck in self-limiting stories that hold us back as managers and leaders. So that's one of the things I address. And as you alluded to, my model, story living, is all about how do we show up? What's the energy and intent that we bring to every conversation that we have? I think you're so right, John. It's like we can get stuck in the shadows. And often it's how we engage with others. We can turn others into villains in our stories, decide that someone's against us and they're never going to be supporting our latest initiative. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do to sort of shift out of that if we're going to be more effective at leading, both in our personal lives and in our work lives.
I agree. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you this question because I think I want to get down, in a sense, to the deep perspective here, okay? Because I can't tell you how many times I've had guests on the podcast. We talk about storytelling all the time. We're developing stories, and I have sort of an interesting perspective on that.
Yeah.
But define for me. Well, we'll
I'd
get
like
there.
to hear that.
Define for me and the audience the essence of what you mean by storytelling. In a sense, how do you frame it? If you took all the things, the clouds and that may shadow what people really understand about storytelling, I want you to get down to the most basics, the foundation, if you will, of what you mean by using stories or storytelling.
Yeah. That's such a great question. And actually, it's the question, John, that I realized when I was writing this book, I had to start with. My brother said to me, well, what do you mean by story? And obviously, his understanding was telling stories to my two little nieces. As you mentioned, the fact that I did over 100 interviews, I started to begin each of those interviews by saying to people, what does story mean to you? So what it means to me is I see stories as sort of little packets of meaning that help us make sense of the world, which can be hugely helpful, especially when it comes to dealing with the complexity and the global challenges we face today. So how do I make sense of this? How do I interpret it? And what am I going to do? What's the action that I'm going to take? And I think you alluded to, there's so much talk about storytelling. And two things there. Firstly, I don't really like storytelling. It makes it sound like a transmission. Whereas actually, I think the story is all about, absolutely starts with listening, putting ourselves in the shoes of our audience, our stakeholders, and seeing what the world looks like from their perspective. And I think that we've all learned that if we just try and impose our worldview on others, we're not going to be successful. So I think the story listening piece is absolutely fundamental. And yeah, storytelling is very groovy at the moment. And it's certainly not a silver bullet. It really needs to be used with care. It's not the new version of greenwash. It's not about spin and lies, manipulation. It's actually about truth-telling and being authentic, using language that is comfortable for you, not sort of corporate jargon and gloss. So yeah, for me, I think stories are really important. We are wired for stories. It's how our brain works. And they help us interpret and make sense of the world.
Yeah. Are you familiar with a gentleman by the name of Jerome Bruner? Do you know who he is? Okay. So Jerome Bruner may be one of the world's best experts on stories.
And we don't know him. This is why I didn't write a book for years, John, because there's so many other people who are experts.
Right. And narratives. He'll also call them narratives as well.
Yeah.
So I used a significant reference from him when I wrote Throttle Up, because I have a significant portion in my book about stories, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Bruner says that there are two elements to a story. One is logic, and the second one is meaning. Okay? And it's hard to pull them apart. So I always tell, I like this example. You're watching a movie, right? It's a story. And there's a couple fleeing the bad guys, if you will, right? And they're running down a road. And the next scene, they're in a car driving away. And you go, well, where'd the car come from? There is no logic. They didn't break into the car. Someone didn't offer them the car. So the logic is broken. Yeah. And when that happens, many times people go, well, what is this story about anyway? How did they get the car? How did they find the car? But anyway, and then of course there's meaning. And they're very hard to pull apart. Yeah. But those are the two sides. So when you said meaning, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. I was just going to add, if you go right back to Aristotle, look at the three parts of rhetoric. He talks similarly about, logic, credibility, and emotion. So I think you and Jerome obviously spot on logic and meaning.
Yeah. He was great because, I really wanted to dive deep because what I do and a lot of the work that I have done in simulations is to use realistic scenarios. So there has to be truth telling. And what my simulations do, my leadership simulations do, is actually create interactive story-making exercises for people. Because I'll take 6 or 7 stakeholder tables, for example, in a realistic scenario, a complex decision-making environment, and let them play different stakeholder groups where they can't deny their own experience in a realistic story. And what they do with that story, what they do with the fundamentals of the story, and how they work together, you can find out if they watch people just pull away, pull away, or they dive in and collaborate with the other groups, right? That's where I like to go, is when they're all of a sudden they realize they don't have the answer to the question and they have to embrace doubt and ambiguity. And the only way to do it is to work collaboratively together. Yeah. So I am a huge believer. The foundation of my simulation work is all based on stories. So it's great to meet someone who gets that, that's what's really going on. And that to me is where the aha moment comes, because they're actively involved in this whole story making process, if you will. I'd love to get any reflections you might have on that.
I absolutely love that, John. And I do a similar thing actually in my training workshop. So the first thing I get people to do is walk in their stakeholder shoes. So very similar to your people sitting at a stakeholder table. It's about immersing yourselves, looking at the world through the eyes of your stakeholder. And what's so fascinating is I start by saying to people, okay, who are your stakeholders? And they'll come up with groups. Often organizations are hugely internally focused. So it'll be procurement, legal, marketing, and then they'll go external, like community, NGOs, government, media, whatever. And then I'll say, okay, I want you to drill down now and think of one human being who is a really, really important stakeholder, who, if you had them on side, could really help you accelerate what you're trying to achieve. If you think about your most important project or initiative. And what's fascinating is two things. Firstly, how difficult it is for people to think of an individual human. Now, we get stuck going, procurement are the bad guys there, or legal, they don't allow me to have any fun, whatever it might be. So I'm like, okay, think about your boss's boss. That they're important, right? You want to get them on side. So we get to the name of an individual who we agree is a very important stakeholder who can help accelerate their projects and initiatives. And then I get them to walk in their stakeholder shoes in pairs. Really simple question. What gets you up in the morning? What are you excited about? What keeps you awake at night? What are you most proud of? If you had a magic wand, what would you wish for at work? And the second point I want to say is, like, similar to your aha, is what often happens is they just can't answer the questions. And they're like, I do not know very much about my most important stakeholder. And it shows that starting point, which I think, as you say, you can see people lean in or lean out, engage with the process. We need to immerse ourselves in our stakeholders' worlds. It's fair enough. It's not a criticism. We're so stuck in the weeds of what we're trying to do. We sometimes forget that there are people on the other side who we need to be part, as you say, who's going to collaborate with us to make it happen. So yes, I think that for me is the first phase of stories, really developing that insight and empathy for where others are. And that's the starting point of our stories.
Yeah, what I've done in mine is, I don't put people, when we're at a table and the tables are listed, like you said. I've worked a lot with folks like law enforcement and folks like that. I don't put them at their traditional table. So if I take people who are like the CEOs or the chiefs of police, I put them at the community table. I take powerful people and put them at the powerless table. And I take the powerless people and I put them at the powerful table. And normally I'll leave someone who knows what's going on at the table to be their guide. And it's amazing to see what happens when you have to do somebody else's job.
Yeah.
And the lights come on and go, wow, this is really hard. I didn't understand how hard this is. And to see the look on people's faces who normally sit at powerful jobs or powerful positions, and now they have no power. The only power they have is the power of influence. And how can they influence changes? Or how can they step up? Or as you say, lean in and hey, like, is there any way we can work this out? Is there a way we can communicate about this and help each other? All of a sudden, you see a lot of those barriers just dwindle away.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very interesting to me, exactly as you say. I say the quickest route there for me, Zoe, is if you're in an organization, they should make it part of their modus operandi is to cross-train. Send the finance people to operations, send the operations people to HR, and move them around so they can get a chance to see what it's like to live under those other conditions. I'd love to get your reflection on that.
Yeah. Well, two things. I mean, I completely agree, John. And I love that point you made about how doing that exercise, they realize the only power they have is the power of influence. I have that conversation with my groups. I say, okay, what levers of power and influence do you have available to you? And I share some examples. We've got the lever of purpose. We believe that this is the right thing to do. We might have the lever of legacy. Maybe we're towards the end of our time in a role and we want to leave the organization better. We have the lever of role modeling. How are we choosing to show up? And then they might say, we've got the lever of money, we've got the lever of regulation, we've got the lever of storytelling, etc. And what's so fascinating is people start coming up with all of this. We've got the lever of expertise. We've got the lever of our role. And you take a step back, very few of those are hard levers. It is actually, and sometimes we fool ourselves, like, if I was at the top of this organization, I'd be running it the way I want it to be. If I was leading this team, I'd be doing it differently. And actually, what you point out to people is, it's mainly, a lot of these are levers of influence, and that's got nothing to do with your title. There potentially are a few hard levers, the lever of finance, the lever of the law and regulation, although I'd argue that people can still flout the law. Anyway, so I think it's a really powerful reminder that actually we have so much more agency than we think. And it's how can we lead whatever our context is? And that starts with us and every single conversation that we have. And The conversation starts with listening to the other person. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think just the other example, when I was working at BT, your point about cross-training, I would go and spend time in the call centres. So I would sit next to the customer service operators and I would listen to the conversations that they were having with the customer. Sometimes I think in organisations, we are so far removed from the end user or the end customer or the citizen. It goes back to your cross-training point. So yeah, I think those are really, really important insights, John.
Yeah, you're making me recall the conversation I had months ago with one of the professors at the University of Arizona, Luigi Paccararo, who told me that he was doing training for a group, doing sort of a cohort training. And two of the people that were in the cohort training were from the same company. And their work connected to one another. But they had worked at the company for a number of years and had never met one another. Mm-hmm. So, and he was just stymied when he found this out. He said, wait a minute, you guys are in the same company. Your work is absolutely interconnected. No, we've never met each other. It's to sit in my module and don't venture out almost. And it's so sad that we've gotten to a point where, personal liaison, I always say there's nothing that will ever replace personal liaison. Nothing. A handshake, a connection at some level, if you will, person to person. So it's sad that it's come to that, but yeah. And unless you force people almost like in a training to do something they don't necessarily want to do or didn't think they could do, it kind of stays the same. And that's sad. Let me ask you a question. I'd like to move on a little bit and change the dialogue just a little bit. You've conducted leadership research at Cambridge while also serving in director and managing director roles at organizations like BT and Weber Shandwick. What did your academic research reveal about effective leadership storytelling that contradicted what you'd learned in 13 years of corporate practice? Where was the biggest gap between theory and reality?
Oh, interesting question. Firstly, I am a practitioner, so I've worked for decades in business. That's my bread and butter. That's what puts food on the table. And when I was my master's thesis was, what's the impact of experiential learning? So a little bit like your trainings, those storytelling scenarios. What's the impact of experiential learning on business leaders' attitudes to accelerating change, to having a positive impact in the world? And so I think my work is very applied. Like, I want people to read story-centered leadership and immediately be able to tell better stories that can accelerate change, come up with new innovative solutions, etc. And that's my approach through all the trainings that I do as well. It's very much, okay, how can you come up with a narrative that's going to help you be successful in what you're trying to do? So I think my work is absolutely grounded. I operate in business, and my work is really grounded in how can we ensure that we can all be more successful. I think your example there of the anecdote you shared about the cohort training, we are stuck in silos, and we absolutely need to cooperate, collaborate, work together with others better and with all different types of stakeholders, not just people in our same organization who look and sound like us. I'm not sure if that answers your question, because I think like theory is theory. We've got to be able to apply it and see the benefits of it, right? It's all about experimenting. You can have a beautiful, shiny framework, but actually you've got to see how you adapt it, finesse it, and apply it and see what the learnings are.
Yeah. I've always believed that one of the more interesting things is capturing the success stories within an organization that should be elevated in a way that says, this is how we want to do business. And Jennifer in finance was faced with this particular issue and couldn't understand all the ramifications or where it all led. But she went out, used influence, collaborated, came back, formed a solution, and that solution was elevated to senior management, who instituted the change and saved us 20 million pounds or $20 million. She's a star.
Hey.
She's a star. I mean, why aren't we telling those stories? And because it defines exactly what Jennifer did, how she did it, and how she brought everybody together, how she used influence, if you will, which she didn't maybe have the title, but that's okay. She went around and brought everybody together to come up with a solution. And I think there's so much of that in organizations. If we peel that onion back, if you will, enough to find those stories that help define how an organization should proceed in the future. What are your feelings about that idea?
I completely agree. I think that's why it's theory is great, but people want specificity. They want examples. And I think it's not just about elevating the success stories. I think we need to equally elevate the stories where it's not quite worked. And how do we learn from that? It's not like, here's my shiny success stories and we're a bit embarrassed by the things that haven't quite gone the way we expected. I think it's really important that we shine a light on the things that haven't worked as well. But yeah, I think that your Jennifer example reminds me of a book that I read many years ago, which was hugely influential for me, by a guy called Stephen Denning. He wrote a book called The Leader's Guide to Storytelling, and he was at the World Bank for 30 years. He was put in charge of a change initiative and could get no traction whatsoever. He realized he needed to change how he was approaching this. He came up with a story-centered approach, which was, I think it was about a big fund for helping to eradicate malaria. And what he did, a bit like your Jennifer example, was he went to where the energy was in the organization, one person at a time, so that there was that sort of contagiousness about, yeah, this is an exciting initiative. It makes sense to me. And now we need to share this with others. So it's find your champions, find the people that can help sharing the Jennifer story and bring that to light rather than just dealing in bland policies, principles, theories. And as you say, bring it to the leadership, but also activate it wherever you are. I think that it goes back to your powerful and powerless example. I think people often forget actually how much power and influence they have. You know, the power and influence of a new recruit who's bringing that energy, zeal, a fresh pair of eyes, different perspectives. So in my work, I really encourage people to see that they are leading in their life, whether it's in their family, in their street, with their neighbours, recognizing that all those actions count. We can all be Jennifer.
Well, there's an old adage that goes, you have as much power as you think you have. And I've always thought that was very cool. You know, it's really about influence.
Yeah.
The other thing, too, is when we talk about the Jennifer stories and the Jen who is working with the World Bank, collecting those stories, creating those stories, retelling those stories, collecting more of those stories. The goal, I think, in many respects, the one that people don't normally see is as you go along, over time, you build this line till it reaches a tipping point. And then when it tips over the other side, people are now involved in the story, in making the story, bringing the story to life in their own bailiwick, if you will, or in their own place where they work. I think I wanted to remind me something you talked about before about this silo effect that many people have. They sit in their silos Every day you hear people talking about the thing we have to do is get rid of silos. Let's get rid of all the silos and let's create cross collaboration. But many people, and I'm not saying at fault here, it's just they've been attuned to the structure of the organization.
Yeah.
Again, what we say and what we reward, they've got to be the same thing. And if they're not, people just sit in the silos. So I don't know, any reaction to that, any response to that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We have built siloed organizations. It's how we're structured, incentivized, rewarded. And then we're like, oh, break out the silos. Well, what's in it for me? Why should I?
Yeah, that's right.
Your point about collecting the stories is so important. That's how we start to change the culture of our organizations and build a sense of possibility. We also can get very stuck in the story of this is how we do things around here. But actually, we can start to change that. And what I talk to people is say, start with the person opposite you. Start with your immediate colleague. How can you build the capability, courage, confidence, and commitment to lead change? We have to start to practice. And I think I talk about find the story treasure in your organizations. We might be naturally storytelling creatures, but for some reason we often switch that off when we're at work. And actually we have to be alert. What are the little examples? What are the anecdotes? Anecdotes are really sticky. They can go viral. Oh, did you hear that example of Jennifer? No, she did this and actually it was transformational and we're thinking of trying that now. So I think that stories, they can help create that momentum, certainly create change in culture, make people feel like, actually, I can do this, I'm excited, I've got a sense of purpose. And those are key elements. But it takes practice.
Yeah, it does.
It really
it's
does
not
take
instantaneous.
Practice. No, and I also say to people, you think about who are the best storytellers. They are stand-up comedians who literally work on their material for years. And they're working live. They're getting feedback from audiences. Is landing? Is it not landing? How could I do that differently? And I think we either expect it's going to be great first time, or we're like, oh, those PowerPoint slides, they were great last time. I'll just stick those together. Or we never say anything because we get stuck in kind of perfection paralysis. Rather than going, okay, I'm going to keep on working at this and I'll keep on practicing it.
Yeah. Well, the other point too is that because stories are so meaning rich, and when you have a successful story, when you tell the Jennifer story, just as you said, it was transformational, then there's meaning. And what that does is meaning then connects you to the most powerful force on the planet, which is imagination. All of a sudden now you can imagine, wait a minute, we don't have to do it this way all the time. It doesn't have to be like this. It just takes someone with the energy to step out and say, no, we're going to try something new. We're going to try something different. And meaning, for me, is the single most powerful motivation force on the planet. Nothing comes close. Meaning is where it's at. Yeah. More than money, more than anything else. I mean, sure, money's great, but the meaning is really where the essence of humanity is striving. In fact, now in the world of AI, you see many people questioning, is there a way to garner meaning anymore? Since AI, well, you know what? I'd hold off on the AI thing a little bit here because much is being overstated. The hype is just crazy. So calm down, everybody. That's my feeling. But it also connects, again, to imagination, that you can imagine life being different. It goes back to the point we started with. You brought up with maybe a difficult, heartfelt, difficult life, but you don't have to live that life over again. You can imagine a new life and turn and go into the most, as Einstein said, the single most powerful force on earth is imagination. He was once asked, how did you come up with the theory of relativity? And his response was, when I was 16 years of age, I imagined myself traveling through the universe riding on a moonbeam. That's imagination. And he always talked about the power of imagination. And that is solely in the hands of human beings. So I agree. And connecting it all, what the stories do, it connect it all up. The stories make sense of it all. So very, very interesting. Any thoughts you might have on that?
I think it's all about, when you asked me the very first question, what stories mean to me, it's packets of meaning. And if we say, imagine, picture this, think of it this way, it's a great place to start. It fires up possibilities. And I think certainly I believe we need to be encouraging people to see that they have possibilities and they can imagine the world different, whether it's their organization, their team, or their family dynamics. And we can be part of telling that. And I had a great speaker once who said that often what our role in life, in work is, we're trying to, as managers and leaders, we're trying to take people from Pain Island to Pleasure Island. And we do that by wrapping our initiatives up in a story. And I think often we're on that journey, that trajectory, and how we help people imagine what Pleasure Island looks like, that's how we enroll people and bring people along. So they're like, yeah, this is great. I want to be part of this. I can see how I fit in with it. I mean, it's the reason why data alone doesn't work, for example. The CFO might get very excited by the numbers, but we have to recognize that for other people, we need to wrap them up with meaning if we're going to create change and action.
Yeah. John, I once read a simple line that said and I believe this to be true, the most successful people in the world are great storytellers. And every time you look around, there's another story or a different story, or people just, I would say, taking stories and then redoing them, if you will. So the question is, what are the original stories that belong to people that need to change? I'll tell you an interesting side bit. I've had 3 people on this podcast, all of whom went to prison. One went to prison for 3 times. It said the first 2 times didn't stick. And all 3 of them now told me that prison saved their lives. All 3 of them now are CEOs of companies who are doing extremely well. One in the financial sector, one in AI, and one in healthcare. And are just reimagined their lives, took charge of their lives. Never once did I hear anything about victimization. I'm the victim here. The world's against me. Woe is me. No, they stood up and said, no, I'm in charge of my life, and moved on and recreated their own stories, their future stories. Just out of sheer grit, if you will. And then I think it's so very, very important. We're getting close to the end, so I'd like to ask you my last question, and that is, what is in the future for you, Zoe? Where do you see yourself going? Where would you like to go in terms of your work and your own future?
Yeah. Gosh, that's profound, John. We started with profound and we're ending with profound. Well, I think that I really passionately believe in the power of stories to help us develop solutions to complex problems we've got in the world. So absolutely my purpose, and actually the reason I wrote this book, the sort of catalyst for writing the book Story-Centered Leadership, was someone said to me, you will have a positive impact on people you never meet. This is a book that I've been carrying around with me for a number of years. As you said at the beginning, I have trained tens of thousands of people in how to tell positive stories that can help us accelerate the change that we need in the world. So I really want to continue to support others to develop their own agency. We've got so much polarization in the world. We're so sort of disconnected often from each other or even our own sense of purpose. And I really believe that stories can be the sort of connective tissue in terms of us finding our own agency and believing that every conversation and every action can matter and count for something. So, very much like your 3 people who went to prison who are now sort of leading impactful lives. So that's what I see in my future. But also very much, I learn from every conversation that I have, and I'm always striving to be a better listener, because I think that's such an important leadership quality. So I equally learn from my 10-year-old niece as well as my 94-year-old mother-in-law every single day. So yeah, so hopefully in the future I'll grow up. But at the moment I still want to be able to experience the joy and keep learning and get this book, Story-Centered Leadership, into people's hands so that they can have a positive impact too.
Yeah, keep contributing no matter what. Just keep pushing forward. One of the small lessons I learned in life is no matter what happens, keep moving forward. Some days you get an inch, some days you get 2 meters, but just got to keep moving forward. Listen, this has been an incredibly delightful conversation. I really appreciate your time here today on the podcast. It's great to find someone with like-minded ideas. We're traveling similar paths, maybe in different ways, but we understand the power of stories. We understand how important they are, what meaning they bring into people's lives in various ways, whether it's a seminar or it's a simulation or whatever it is. It captures the imagination, pushes them to think about life in a different way. So I'm truly grateful for your time here today, and I wish you every success in the future. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, John.
This is Dr. John Dentico. Remember, meaning is the new money, but it requires building the structures that deliver it. If today's conversation challenged your thinking or gave you a framework worth implementing, share it with a leader who needs to hear it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit throttleupleadership.com for more resources. Until next time, keep throttling up and keep the people at the center of everything you do.